Traveler is poised for a renaissance. Could this be true? I certainly have a twinkle in my eye when I speak to you about this game and about this way of playing role-playing games that I think is very exciting and could see a lot of time at the table. What are the opportunities in the wider culture of RPGs and culture in general that might enable this to take place? And what are the blockers? What are the things that are preventing this from being the case, and possibly why Traveler is something that a lot of people haven't heard of? And how can we change this as people who are excited about Traveler? And what can we do to make Traveler have a renaissance? Is it possible? I'm the Complex Games Apologist. Let's look at it. So first, I think we need to operationalize the question of what a renaissance would be. Now, of course, we have the old school renaissance, which is a big deal in the hobby right now. And there's also the possibility that we might see a renaissance in the White Wolf games as a new company is at the helm. And I think that the same could be the case for sci-fi adventuring in the coming years. So what would a renaissance look like? It would mean widespread adoption of Traveler. You would see people playing in a campaign mode Traveler and having a table where new people would come and go and a long-term stories would develop, the sort of thing that would create memories, and then new tables would be born from them. And from that, we would see more consumption of Traveler content, leading to higher value stuff, things with better art, and higher quality content. And if we take that as a definition of a renaissance, I think that Traveler is not there at the moment. It's holding its own in a very busy hobby with a lot of games, new games and old games, coming and going, struggling to find time at the table. Now, as there have been so many editions of the official Traveler game, and as the Third Imperium is only one setting, it's the one that I talk about here in my channel, what is it that Traveler is, above and beyond just an italicized bit of red font? Well, I think it's an RPG that is consciously science fiction rather than science fantasy. Some rules of physics apply, and verisimilitude is sort of king. And it's also something where there's real people, there's humans, and they're maybe going on adventures. And that's the thing that I talk about, is the idea that Traveler is something where there's a cohesive group of party members and we're having a zoomed-in adventure that is about their quests, their endeavors, out there in the beyond. So what are some opportunities within the RPG hobby that could lead Traveler to start having some success? Well, I see games that have a cohesive idea of what the course of play will be and kind of bring a new idea of what an adventuring group and what adventures will be about. I see games like that succeeding in Kickstarter and otherwise. And I think that Traveler, as a consciously sci-fi and place for adventure, could be one of those games. So what are some blockers and some issues that prevent that sort of rebirth from happening on Kickstarter, or from someone calling up Mark Miller and wanting to create kind of a new imagining of a Traveler game? Well, I think there are divisions within the Traveler community about what Traveler is. Some folks really are devoted to the little black books, and mostly they're talking amongst themselves in OSR communities rather than sort of evangelizing Traveler to newcomers within the hobby. And I think that there's also a strong DIY ethos within the Traveler community. There's a lot of folks who have written amazing programs to kind of generate stuff from the Universal Planetary Profile. There's a lot of people who have cataloged incredible maps, and they like to make tons of deck plans. And like, I think, a lot of folks from the earlier days of the hobby who really enjoyed creating their own content, the idea of having a setting and a kind of a really strong voice for what play should be might be a little offensive to them. And I think that a Kickstarter for a game that really overtly says this is going to be about a party of adventurers who go around on a ship trying to make ends meet and getting into trouble, that might turn off some folks. So I'm wondering if some consensus could develop around a type of play and a type of game that would be most likely to attract new folks to the hobby. So another opportunity is that in the wider culture, space is sort of exciting again. Real space, out here in real life, is becoming a place where we're seeing a lot more rockets, and rockets that can take off and land again even. And sci-fi is maybe budding again as a genre that people are excited about, at least on the screen. There are other issues with sci-fi that I want to point out, though. One of them is that the new generation of folks are able to consume a narrow band of media that only really fits their preferences. And so you can turn and look at only the sort of science fantasy, probably, that exists in anime, for example, and you won't have a consciousness of sort of the physics applies and sort of the optimism or at least probing of the human future, which is sort of particular to what science fiction means as a genre, as opposed to kind of more narrowly defined ideas of genre. And there's also less familiarity with the touchstones of science fiction, things like Alien and Enemy Mine, that I like to bring up as really iconic things that mean a lot to what it means to be playing science fiction at the table. And in general, there's far less literacy about the classics of science fiction that inspired Traveller. Larry Niven and Isaac Asimov were real inspirations to me as a kid, but reading books, and especially books in a genre which is now sort of politically charged as there's a lot of disagreement within the science fiction community, is perhaps not something that younger adults are doing, at least not delving deeply into that genre. And so I think we must again return to the idea that whatever new versions of Traveller, whatever new visions are presented to a wider audience, they need to really come bundled with a vision of what science fiction is, because the audience won't know it when they see it unless we sort of guide them through it. So for my part, my idea of a solution to how to get a Traveller renaissance is to bundle this vision of science fiction and adventuring independent of people's literacy in the genre, on screen or on the page, which means that we probably need to bring the setting tightly into the mechanics of the game, and we need to have the course of play very strongly suggested, even sort of when it comes to what you ought to do with your ship. This might mean something like pluck or success as actual lines on the character sheet. I'm just brainstorming here. But I will say that this means that gamism intrudes into Traveller. There's a strong ethos of kind of pure and minimalist simulation in Traveller, which even comes back to the idea that there's no leveling in Traveller. The characters are basically static once they're minted in the character creation system. And I think that really an advancement track and kind of a place for your character to go from a starting point, at least on the page, not just once you see play at the table and dice are rolling, is something that really energizes folks to pick up a game and open the pages and start playing, because they say, well, I can do this on the page, but I can do so much more if I only get to play and unlock this next tier. And I talk about that when I talk about my excitement about why Dungeons & Dragons is unique and it creates tiers of play. First, we can't turn invisible, then we can. Then we can ask the gods for a couple answers, and finally we can start teleporting, moving to other planes of existence. And in Traveller, we might traverse from kind of schlepping around in the shuttle attached to a subsidized merchant, to owning our own starship, to perhaps kind of orchestrating our own corsair actions, participating as a privateer in the Fifth Frontier War, maybe brokering a peace settlement on a frontier world, which also includes us as the men who would be king. Now, Traveller campaigns can take many vectors, and I know that the old school community around Traveller is really attached to the idea that adventurers in Traveller are sort of experienced and seasoned folks. And I think that's great, and I think it really brings a lot of the uniqueness to Traveller. But I think there also needs to be some room for wider-eyed, more novice protagonists, because that's something that we're seeing a lot in at least the space fiction that we see on screen nowadays. I finally got to see Force Awakens, and although some folks do have some criticisms of the characters and the plot, I have to say that I was astounded by the really charming pluck of the two leads. And I think that people will want to, especially the young people we want to bring into this game, want to create characters that don't know much at all, but can sort of, through the force of their moxie, find their way. And I'm hoping that there's room for that sort of thinking within something that we can call Traveller. So, I'm sure that I've ruffled a few feathers. I'm sure some folks disagree with me or kind of have a take it or leave it sort of stance about some of my suggestions, because they're happily playing Traveller in a way that works for them. For my part, and for a lot of other folks, it's a tough sell to sell a game that has characters with no advancement track, And it's also a tough sell to bring to life how the setting is this amazing thing that animates play, and when it's not there really on the page in any sort of mechanics, and especially not so in the kind of art that I think really we need. And I'm also sure that the idea of bundling the Third Imperium setting so tightly into a new Traveller game in the same way that the World of Darkness is baked into Vampire the Masquerade might be something which some folks might not receive so well. Ultimately, I'm just one voice in the crowd. I am a younger person who would like to see at least some of that idea of Traveller, especially the consciously science fiction and consciously about adventurers ethos, come into the RPG hobby once again and be an option when me and several other folks are sitting down to play. And that cohesive vision of what the game will be once we start rolling dice, I think is really important to why games succeed and capture people's imagination. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that it all has to be wired into the game, and it could be that we could use universal systems and all the various versions of Traveller that are already out there to accomplish this end. And maybe that's what we'll do, each at our own tables. But maybe we can start a dialogue right here about how to bring Traveller into a renaissance. For my part, I think in the near term what I'm going to be doing is trying to fit Traveller's ideas into this new game, which is more science fantasy oriented by Paizo, called Starfinder. And we'll be talking a little bit about the races of Starfinder a little later this week on the Complex Games Apologist. Thanks.
Thank you for checking out my channel. If you enjoyed what you've seen here, maybe check out one of my in-depth video essays on topics in the tabletop gaming world, or subscribe with alerts so that you get updated anytime I put up new content here on YouTube. And above all, let me know what you think about this topic and about my videos in general by leaving a like or a dislike, and especially your own opinions in the comments below.